My name is Leo. I'm 27, and for the past 4 years, my life has been contained within the quiet, tree-lined streets of Havenwood. It's a city that feels perpetually caught in the gentle exhale of autumn, a place of old brick, riverside parks, and the kind of hushed ambition that doesn't feel the need to shout. I came here for my degree in urban planning at Northwood University, and in the process, I found a sense of peace that had always eluded me back home. My small apartment, with its single, oversized window overlooking a canopy of sycamore trees, has been more of a sanctuary than any room I ever had in my parents' house. It was here, surrounded by blueprints and books, that I learned to build things, not just on paper, but within myself. This story, I suppose, is about the final blueprint I had to draw, the one that laid out the boundaries of my own life, separate from the gravitational pull of my family. It's a story about my sister, Clara, and the quiet, persistent way a family can love one child into the spotlight and another into the wings. Clara is 2 years older than me, a whirlwind of charisma and artistic fervor who has always been the sun in our family's solar system. We, the rest of us, were simply planets orbiting her, content to reflect her light. She was supposed to graduate from the State University last year, a music major with a voice that could, on its good days, make you believe in magic. But during her final year, she dropped out. It wasn't a matter of failing grades or disciplinary action, though both were certainly plausible given her sporadic attendance. It was a choice. She had formed a band, a post-rock outfit called Ephemeral Echo, during her sophomore year, and they had been offered a chance, she said, to go all in. Most of us aunts, uncles, the few family friends who dared to voice an opinion saw it as a reckless gamble. A degree was a tangible thing, a foundation. A band felt like a dream woven from smoke. I kept my thoughts to myself. It wasn't my place, I reasoned. I was the younger brother, the steady, predictable one. My advice would have been received as a critique, a drab note of practicality in her vibrant symphony, and I doubted she would have welcomed it. I loved my sister, and more than that, I understood the powerful allure of a dream. So I said nothing. The dream, as they often do, dissolved. 3 months after she left school, the band she had sacrificed her education for replaced her. They had found someone, a professional sound engineer, who could mix their tracks with a technical skill Clara simply didn't possess. She was a performer, a vocalist, not a producer. She came home to Briar Creek, our hometown, with no degree, no band, and no job. The silence in her life must have been deafening after the noise of her ambition. She tried to start a new project, but her friends, the ones who had cheered her on from the sidelines, were now building their own careers in marketing, nursing, and accounting. They weren't willing to abandon their stable paths for her uncertain one. And so, she settled into a state of arrested development, living in her childhood bedroom, supported entirely by our parents. They saw her not as an adult who had made a poor decision, but as a wounded bird with a broken wing. They pitied her, coddled her, and paid for her lattes, her nights out, her life. For me, this was a bitter pill to swallow, though I tried to pretend it wasn't. When I graduated from high school, the conversation with my parents had been brief and clear. "We're proud of you, Leo," my father had said, his hand resting on my shoulder for a moment. "But college is on you. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. There was no malice in his voice, just a statement of fact. I was expected to be self-sufficient. I took out loans, worked part-time jobs shelving books at the university library and bussing tables at a diner on weekends. I ate instant noodles and learned to stretch a $20 bill over a week. I never complained. It was the path laid out for me, and I walked it. The disparity wasn't a sudden revelation, it was a slow, creeping dawn I had been witnessing my whole life. Clara was the one who got the new car for her 16th birthday. I inherited our mother's old sedan. Clara's teenage missteps were phases, mine were disappointments. Her failures were misfortunes, my successes were expectations. I had long ago accepted that I was not the favored child. It was a quiet ache in my chest, a fact of my existence as certain as my own name. But watching them enable her indefinite adolescence while I meticulously paid down the interest on my student loans, that was different. It felt like they weren't just favoring her, they were actively discounting my struggle, my discipline, my entire journey. I tried to talk to them. On a visit home during a holiday break, I found my mother in the kitchen, carefully arranging a platter of cheese and crackers for Clara and her friends, who were laughing loudly on the back patio. "Mom," I started, trying to keep my voice even. "Can we talk for a minute?" She glanced at me, her smile a little strained. "Of course, sweetie. What is it?" "It's about Clara," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I'm just concerned. She's not looking for work, she's not making any plans. And you and Dad are just letting it happen." Her face tightened. The warm, maternal mask slipped, revealing a flicker of defensiveness. "Leo, your sister is going through a very difficult time. She had her heart broken, her dreams shattered. She needs our support right now, not our judgment." "Support is one thing," I countered, a little more forcefully. "But she's 29. Don't you think it's time she started thinking about her future?" I had to figure it out on my own. And then came the familiar checkmate, the move I could never seem to counter. Her eyes welled with tears. "Is that what this is about?" she whispered, her voice thick with wounded emotion. "You're comparing yourself to her? I thought you were more mature than that, Leo. We did what we thought was best for both of you. You're strong. You've always been so independent. Clara, she's more sensitive. She needs us more." It was a perfect trap. If I continued, I was cruel and jealous. If I stopped, I was conceding to a logic that made no sense. I was being punished for my strength, and she was being rewarded for her perceived weakness. Each confrontation ended the same way, with me feeling guilty for even raising the issue, my own feelings invalidated by their carefully constructed narrative of Clara's fragility. The emotional toll was immense, and with each attempt, I felt a little more of myself being chipped away, a little more resigned to the dynamic. Distancing myself felt impossible. They were my parents, and the filial cord, however frayed, still felt unbreakable. The final severing of that cord began, as these things often do, with a simple invitation. My graduation was a week away. It was more than a ceremony to me. It was the culmination of 4 years of relentless effort, of solitude, and sacrifice. It was the finish line of a marathon I had run entirely on my own. I had called my parents a few weeks prior, my voice bright with an optimism that felt, in retrospect, painfully naive. "So, the ceremony is on the 20th, at 10 a.m., I'd said. "It's about a 4-hour drive, so you could come up the morning of, or the night before. I can get a hotel room for you." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a small pocket of static that seemed to stretch into an eternity. "Oh, honey," my mother finally said, her voice laced with a careful, practiced regret. "The 20th is it's a really difficult day for us." "Difficult how?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "Is everything okay?" "It's just, we have a commitment here," my father cut in, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Something we can't get out of." A commitment. A single day off work, a 4-hour drive to see their only son graduate from university. This was apparently an insurmountable obstacle. The vagueness of it was what stung the most. It felt dismissive, as if the details of their prior engagement were none of my business. The truth, however, was far worse than a simple scheduling conflict. It came out, as truths often do in our family, during a subsequent argument, a phone call that escalated from polite frustration to raw, unvarnished hurt. I had pressed them, asking what could possibly be more important. My father, his patience worn thin, finally snapped. "Look, Leo, it's for your sister. We're throwing a party for her." I was silent, the words failing to compute. "A party? What for?" "It's a surprise for her." My mother's voice interjected, softer, pleading. "To celebrate her. It's on the anniversary of what would have been her graduation day. We just wanted to do something to lift her spirits. She's been so down." The air left my lungs. They were missing my actual, hard-won graduation to throw a commemorative party for the graduation she had voluntarily abandoned 8 months before finishing. The sheer, staggering absurdity of it was like a physical blow. "You're joking," I said, my voice flat. "You can't be serious." "Leo, please try to understand," my mother pleaded. "No, I don't understand." The dam of my long-held composure finally broke. A torrent of frustration, of years of feeling secondary, poured out of me. "I don't understand how you can choose to celebrate her quitting over celebrating me finishing. Postpone her party. It's a made-up event. Mine is real. I earned this." "You're overreacting," my father said, his voice cold. "Your sister needs us on that day. We expect you to be mature enough to understand that." The word mature landed like a slap. My maturity was always the excuse, the get-out-of-jail-free card for their neglect. Mature? I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You know what? You're right. I am mature. I'm mature enough to see exactly what's happening here. You've never encouraged her to stand on her own. You've cushioned every fall, excused every failure, and in doing so, you've made sure she'll never have to grow up. And you've made damn sure that I could never, ever rely on you for anything. You're failing both of us, in completely different ways." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. The silence of my apartment pressed in on me. They weren't coming. It wasn't a shock, not really. It was just the final, definitive confirmation of a truth I had lived with my entire life. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was accompanied by a strange sense of clarity. The rope I had been clinging to, hoping it would one day pull me closer, had finally snapped. After the call, I sat by my window, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the sycamore leaves, casting shifting patterns on my floor. The anger had subsided, leaving behind a profound sense of emptiness. The thought of sitting alone in that vast auditorium, surrounded by beaming families, felt unbearable. But then, a different thought surfaced, a small flicker of light in the gloom. My grandparents. My relationship with my dad's parents, Arthur and Eleanor, was a quiet constant in my life. They lived a few hours north, in a small town with a general store and a single blinking traffic light. We weren't exceptionally close in the way of frequent visits, but our connection ran deep. They saw things. They saw the imbalance in our family, the subtle and not-so-subtle ways Clara's needs always eclipsed mine. They had co-signed on one of my private student loans when I, out of a stubborn sense of pride, refused to even ask my parents. My grandfather, Arthur, a retired carpenter with hands as gnarled and steady as oak roots, had tried to talk to my father about it once. I'd overheard them during a Christmas visit years ago. "Richard," he'd said, his voice low but firm, "the boy is working himself to the bone. The girl gets everything handed to her on a silver platter. That's not balance. That's not fair." My father had become defensive, of course, and nothing changed. But the fact that my grandfather had tried, that he had seen me, that meant everything. So, with my heart still aching, I picked up the phone and dialed their number. My grandmother, Eleanor, answered, her voice as warm and comforting as a handmade quilt. "Leo, dear. What a lovely surprise." And then, it all came tumbling out. I told them everything. The call about the graduation, the pathetic excuse, the party for Clara. I tried to maintain a semblance of composure, to frame it as a simple change of plans, but my voice cracked, and the unshed tears from the earlier call finally fell. I told them it wasn't their fault, that I was fine, that I just wanted to know if, by some chance, they might be free to come instead. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, my grandfather's voice, rough with emotion, came through. "They told you that? They're skipping your graduation for a pity party? It's okay, Grandpa." "Really?" I said, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "No, son, it is not okay," he said, and I could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. "It is not okay at all." My grandmother murmured her agreement, her distress audible. They apologized profusely, as if it were their failure, their son's behavior, a reflection on them. We'll be there, Leo, Arthur said, his voice now steely. You can count on it. And believe me, your parents are going to regret this. They are going to sorely regret the pain they've caused you. His words were a balm to my raw emotions, but they also carried a weight that made me uneasy. It was an anger born of love, but it was fierce, and I had a feeling it wouldn't remain contained for long. My premonition proved correct. That night, or rather, in the deep, silent hours of the next morning, my phone buzzed violently on my nightstand. The screen glowed with my father's name. The time was 2:13 a.m. I answered, my mind groggy with sleep. What have you done? He roared, no preamble, no hello. His voice was a furious rasp. What are you talking about? I asked, sitting up, my heart pounding. Don't play dumb with me, Leo. Your grandparents were just here. They tore into me, into your mother. They even went after Clara, called her lazy right to her face. What did you say to them? My mind reeled. They had driven 4 hours in the middle of the night. I pictured my grandfather standing in my parents' living room, his quiet strength transformed into righteous fury. I told them the truth. I said, my voice shaking slightly. I told them you weren't coming to my graduation because you were throwing a party for Clara. You're selfish, you know that? Incredibly selfish and dramatic. He spat. You've turned them against us. Then, the other shoe dropped. For years, my grandparents had been sending my parents a generous monthly sum, believing it was helping to support both of their grandchildren. My father, it turned out, had been painting a very specific picture for them. He told them that Clara was actively, desperately job hunting, sending out resumes every day, only to be met with constant rejection in a tough market. It was a complete fabrication. Whenever I was home, Clara was on the couch watching reality TV, or out with friends at a local bar, her job search a topic that was never, ever discussed. My parents knew my grandparents wouldn't approve of her idleness, so they had constructed a lie, exploiting their generosity and my sister's situation. My conversation with my grandparents had brought that lie crashing down. They had been aware of Clara's lack of motivation, but had continued the financial support out of love for their granddaughter. But learning that they were also being actively deceived, and that this deception was enabling the very behavior they disapproved of, was the final straw. They had confronted my parents, announced they were cutting off the money, and left. You have to fix this, Leo. My father pleaded, his anger suddenly replaced by a desperate panic. You have to call them, tell them you overreacted, that it was a misunderstanding. Then, in his haste, he made a fatal error. They're going to give the money to you now. They told me. They want to give it all to you. The line went quiet. He had revealed his true motivation. It wasn't about the family rift, the harsh words, or Clara's feelings. It was about the money. A cold, clarifying calm washed over me. I see, I said softly. Good night, Dad. I hung up before he could respond and immediately called my grandparents. My grandmother answered, her voice weary but firm. They confirmed everything. They were horrified by the depth of my father's deceit. They were redirecting the funds to me enough to pay off my remaining student loans and provide a substantial nest egg to start my life. We should have done this years ago, Leo. My grandfather said, his voice heavy with regret. We let him fool us. This money, it's not a handout. It's an apology. It's an investment in your future, a future you've worked so hard for. We want you to have a smooth start, without the weight of those loans your father should have helped with. My first instinct was to refuse. I had made it this far on my own. Accepting their help felt like a concession, a contradiction of the very independence I was so proud of. But then I thought about it. I thought about the years of scraping by, of the constant, low-level anxiety about debt. I thought about my parents, who had forced me into that struggle while sheltering my sister from it. Accepting this gift wasn't an admission of failure. It was an embrace of love. It was accepting support from the only people who had offered it unconditionally. It was allowing myself to receive a kindness I had long ago stopped expecting. Okay, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It felt like relief, like gratitude, like grief, all rolled into one. Okay. Thank you. The next morning, my phone was a minefield. Dozens of missed calls and a long chain of text messages from my parents, and, for the first time in months, from Clara. They were a chorus of frantic demands and accusations. You need to fix this. You're tearing this family apart over nothing. How could you be so greedy? Clara's message was the most cutting. I can't believe you'd do this to me. I'm in a fragile emotional state right now. I need time to heal and focus on my art before I can even think about working. You should have some empathy instead of making everything about money. I read the messages, one after another, and felt nothing. The emotional hooks they had always used on me, guilt, obligation, pity, no longer found purchase. Their love, I finally, fully understood, was conditional. It was contingent upon my compliance, my willingness to remain in the role they had assigned me. And realizing that was the most liberating feeling in the world. I held down the power button on my phone, selected their numbers, and pressed block. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. As my graduation day approached, a quiet confidence began to take root in my heart. For the first time, I felt truly in control of my own narrative. My grandparents were coming. They were the only family I needed in that audience. I started talking to my close friends in Havenwood, really talking, for the first time, about the dynamics of my family. I had always kept that part of my life private, shrouded in a vague sense of shame. Sharing it was a catharsis. Their validation, their simple, unwavering support, was like a brace on my spine. They didn't see me as dramatic or selfish. They saw me as someone who had finally stood up for himself. I was no longer going to be taken advantage of. I would not back down. The blueprint for my new life was drawn, and I was ready to start building. Graduation day dawned bright and clear, the sky a perfect, cloudless blue. The air in Havenwood was filled with a palpable sense of excitement and relief. As I walked towards the university grounds in my cap and gown, I felt a sense of pride that was, for the first time, entirely my own, untainted by any need for my parents' approval. My grandparents, Arthur and Eleanor, were already waiting for me near the entrance to the main hall, their faces beaming. My grandmother fussed with my gown, her hands gentle, while my grandfather simply clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes shining. "We are so proud of you, Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Just as we were about to head inside, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. My parents. They got out, dressed in their Sunday best, their faces arranged in expressions of strained enthusiasm. It was so unexpected that for a moment, I was speechless. They had never shown up for anything unless there was some benefit to them, and I couldn't imagine what they hoped to gain here. "Leo!" my mother called out, rushing towards me, her arms open for a hug I instinctively sidestepped. "We're here! We wouldn't miss this for the world!" My father hung back, looking uncomfortable as his eyes met my grandfather's cold, steady gaze. "You don't have tickets," I stated, my voice flat. I had given my only 2 guest passes to my grandparents. They weren't allowed inside. "Oh," my mother said, her smile faltering. "Well, we can wait out here. We just wanted to be here, to show our support. We'll talk after the ceremony," I said, turning away. "My grandparents and I are going inside." The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches and applause. As my name was called and I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I didn't scan the crowd for my parents. I looked for Arthur and Eleanor. They were on their feet, clapping, their faces a portrait of pure, uncomplicated joy. In that moment, they were all the family I needed. Afterward, we met my parents at a restaurant in a nearby hotel. The air was thick with unspoken tension. I had chosen the place deliberately. It was neutral territory, public and bright. As we sat down, I laid out my terms. "I'm happy to have lunch," I said, looking directly at them. "But I'm in a celebratory mood today. I don't want to talk about what happened. No arguments, no drama. Can we agree to that?" My father nodded stiffly. My mother, however, saw an opening. "Of course, sweetie. We just want to say, we're so sorry. She reached across the table, her hand hovering over mine. And Clara is sorry too. She wanted to be here, but she had a last-minute job interview at a little cafe downtown. She sends her love and she feels just terrible. The apology, when it came, felt hollow, rehearsed. They spoke of their failings as parents, their desire to mend our broken relationship. They admitted they had been wrong. But I could see the truth in their eyes. This wasn't about genuine remorse. It was a performance. It was a strategic retreat, prompted by the sudden and alarming loss of my grandparents' financial support. We want to make it right, my father said, his voice earnest. We want our family back. I listened patiently, letting them have their say. My grandparents remained silent, watching me, letting me lead. When they were finished, I took a slow breath. I appreciate the apology, I said, choosing my words with care. But I'm not ready for that. I need space. For the past 4 years, I've built a life for myself here, on my own. I need to focus on that now, on my future, without all of this. I gestured vaguely between us. Emotional turmoil. But we're your parents, my mother said, her voice rising in disbelief. You have a duty to forgive your family. I'm not a child who broke a window, I replied calmly. This isn't about a simple mistake. This is about a pattern of behavior that has spanned my entire life. If you are truly sorry, you will respect my need for space. That is the only way to make it right for now. Their faces fell. They had expected absolution, a quick return to the status quo, with the money hopefully to follow. My father started to argue, his voice taking on the familiar, lecturing tone he used when he felt his authority was being challenged. He started to draw a ridiculous parallel between their parental failings and my own childhood mistakes. That's when I saw it with perfect clarity. They were siding with my grandparents, feigning remorse, simply to get back in their good graces and, by extension, back to their money. The transparency of it was almost insulting. Dad, I said, cutting him off. I know what you're doing. It's not going to work. My mother's eyes filled with tears. It was her go-to tactic, the emotional floodgate she opened whenever she was losing an argument. I had seen it 100 times before, and for the first time, it had no effect on me. I felt nothing but a weary sense of pity. Please don't do that, Mom, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. We were in a public restaurant. Please don't cry. You're making me uncomfortable, and if you continue, my grandparents and I are going to leave. Her tears flowed faster. I can't help it, she sobbed, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. My feelings are real. How can you be so cold, so unfeeling? I remained silent, my expression unchanging. I started to slide my chair back from the table. The movement, small as it was a clear signal. I was not bluffing. Her sobbing sputtered and, after a few more dramatic gasps, subsided. She looked at me, her eyes red and resentful, and seemed to finally understand that the old rules no longer applied. The manipulation had failed. The waiter arrived with our food, and we ate the rest of the meal in a tense, awkward silence. When it was over, we parted ways in the hotel lobby with stilted goodbyes. As I walked out into the bright afternoon sun with Arthur and Eleanor, a profound sense of relief washed over me. It was over. I had stood my ground, spoken my truth, and held my boundaries. The support of my grandparents was a warm, steady presence at my back. It had been a difficult, draining day, but in its own strange way, it had been a fulfilling one. I had finally graduated, in more ways than one. In the days that followed, I held firm to my decision. I did not initiate contact with my parents, and I ignored their sporadic attempts to reach out. The silence was peaceful. But the drama, it turned out, was not yet over. It simply shifted to a new, more public arena, social media. Clara, who had been conspicuously absent from the post-graduation confrontation, suddenly launched a full-scale offensive against me online. On her Facebook page, she wrote a long, rambling post, a masterpiece of self-pity and revisionist history. She painted me as a cold, ungrateful son, a money-grubbing manipulator who had turned our sweet, elderly grandparents against their own loving children. She threatened to cut ties with any of our mutual friends who took his side. It was bizarre. Our relationship had been distant for years. She had shown almost no interest in my life. Yet here she was, acting as the self-appointed defender of a family unit she had contributed so little to. The public nature of her attack was mortifying. We shared dozens of friends from high school, people who were now being treated to a front-row seat at our family's implosion. I felt a surge of anger, but also a duty to defend myself against her lies. Responding to each person individually felt impossible. With a heavy heart, I realized I had to address it publicly. I had spent so long in silence, allowing their narrative to dominate. No more. It was time to set the record straight, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. This public battle was embarrassing and frustrating, but it was a necessary final step in reclaiming my own truth. The situation escalated into a firestorm over the next few hours, fueled by Clara's increasingly desperate posts. It was a single, exhausting day of back-and-forth arguments in comment sections and private messages that finally brought the last, hidden truths to light. In a long, rambling post meant to defend our parents, Clara claimed they had always treated us equally. She wrote that she had experienced no more privilege than I had, and that I was simply playing the victim to win our grandparents' sympathy. She rehashed her old story about her band, Ephemeral Echo, portraying herself as a pure artist used and discarded by callous friends. She insisted that she, too, had been forced to take out student loans, and that she would have succeeded if not for the world being against her. It was a narrative designed to elicit maximum sympathy. But she had miscalculated. One of the former members of her band, a quiet guitarist named Sam who I still knew from high school, saw the post. He had remained silent for years, but Clara's public distortion of the truth was too much for him to stomach. He sent me a private message. "Leo, man, I'm sorry you're going through this. What Clara is saying, it's not true. None of it." He then laid out the real story. The band had never promised her a permanent spot or a full-time career. She had been a temporary vocalist, a friend helping out. They made it clear to her that if they ever decided to get serious, they would need a professional sound engineer to manage their complex electronic soundscapes. Clara, he said, had heard what she wanted to hear. She built a fantasy on a foundation of misinterpretation and willful delusion. Her decision to drop out of college was entirely her own, a reckless leap based on a future that was never on the table. When they finally hired the engineer and gently told her they were moving in a different direction, she had twisted it into a story of betrayal. But the most damning revelation was about her tuition. Sam knew for a fact that Clara never took out a single student loan. He had been dating her roommate at the time, and knew that our parents had paid for every single semester, a fact Clara bragged about often. Armed with this information, the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The depth of the deception was staggering. It wasn't just my parents enabling her, it was a collaborative, long-term fabrication involving all three of them. I decided not to use Sam's information as a weapon in the public forum. Instead, I simply posted a final, calm statement. I wrote that there was a great deal of misinformation being shared, that the financial realities of our upbringing were not what they seemed, and that I was choosing to step away from the public argument for my own well-being. I wished everyone well and logged off. The effect was immediate. My quiet refusal to engage further, coupled with the private conversation Sam was now having with our mutual friends, caused Clara's narrative to crumble. Within hours, she deleted all of her posts. The digital evidence of her deception vanished, but the truth remained. With these final, ugly truths exposed, any lingering thought of reconciliation died. The betrayal was too deep, the lies too intricate. I knew, with a certainty that was both heartbreaking and liberating, that I had to sever ties completely. My grandparents, after I shared Sam's message with them, made the same choice. They were appalled and heartbroken by the extent of their sons' and granddaughters' deceit. Today, the anger has mostly faded, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. The storm has passed. My life in Havenwood continues, imbued with a new sense of purpose. I am focusing on my career, on building cities and communities on paper, and on building a life of integrity and peace for myself in reality. My grandparents are my family now, our bond forged stronger in the fire of this conflict. Sometimes, late at night, I look out my window at the sleeping city and think about the complex architecture of a family, the load-bearing walls of trust, the hidden frameworks of lies. Our family home was built on a faulty foundation. I feel a pang of sadness for the structure that collapsed, for the people I once loved who chose deceit over honesty. But I am not buried in the rubble. I walked away. And now, I am free to build my own house, on solid ground, with windows open to a future of my own design.